In the endless silence of deep space, a small convoy of alien refugee ships drifted with broken engines and failing life support their once proud vessels.
Ow.
Little more than floating coffins, the crew and families inside clung to fading hope as air grew thinner and food supplies turned to dust. They had sent out thousands of distress calls to every known empire, every so-called protector of the galaxy, but no one answered. No signal came back. No ship appeared to help them. Instead, the galaxy remained cold and uncaring, as if their suffering was invisible. The children cried softly in the dark corridors, their mothers trying to hush them, even as their own voices cracked with despair. Fathers tried to repair wires and patch broken panels, but the power was gone, and the stars outside watched in silence like distant eyes that refused to blink. And in that silence, fear grew heavy among them. They knew the truth. The galaxy had left them to die. Their lives meant nothing to those who ruled the stars, and every second felt like the slow tightening of a noose. Yet in that same void, one of the navigators noticed something strange on the long-range scanners. At first it seemed like interference, just a flicker against the static. But then it repeated a steady pulse, a rhythm too precise to be natural. The weak signal was old, carrying a code that none of the aliens immediately recognized. It was not from the empires, not from the pirates, not from any neighbor system. It was older, far older than anything still used in the galaxy. Curiosity clashed with fear as the captain ordered the signal amplified, and as static cleared, the message repeated again and again. A voice mechanical and broken, but clear enough to pierce the silence. It said, "This is UN's Resolute Automated Distress Beacon, active. Do not approach unless authorized." The words meant nothing to most, but the oldest among them shivered, for they remembered the stories whispered across generations about a race long gone, a race called humanity. The name alone stirred both awe and dread, for humanity was said to have vanished centuries ago. After a great war with the empires, no one knew why they had disappeared. Some said they destroyed themselves. Others said they left willingly into the unknown, but the galaxy remembered their wrath and their unmatched ships. Their fleets had burned entire armadas. Their soldiers had fought with impossible fury, and when they vanished, the empire swore relief, but also fear, for legend said that if humanity ever returned, the stars would tremble again. And now, in the heart of the void, a broken convoy of dying refugees had heard their echo. The refugees debated desperately. Some said it was a trap, an old human warship waiting to kill anyone foolish enough to follow. Others argued it might be salvation, a lifeline when every other power had abandoned them. Hunger and fear pressed them to decide quickly, and finally the captain chose hope over fear. He ordered the convoy to follow. The signal engines groaned as the dying ships turned their course toward the unknown path, following the steady pulse of the forgotten warship. And as they drifted closer, sensors began to detect mass, not a station, not an asteroid, but something vast, something sleeping in the dark, like a beast waiting to awaken. When they saw it, their voices froze in their throats. A colossal structure of metal loomed, a head covered in scars of ancient battles, its hull blackened, its weapons silent. Yet even in slumber, it radiated power larger than any Empire cruiser. The ship hung in silence, like a ghost from another age, and stamped across its broken side were faded words, UN's Resolute, the same name from the beacon. And suddenly the silence around them grew heavier, as if the void itself held its breath. The refugees felt terror and hope twist inside them together, for they had found the lost warship of humanity. No light shone from its windows, no crew walked its decks, yet the beacon pulsed steadily, guiding them in like a lighthouse calling to lost sailors. Some whispered prayers, others whispered curses, afraid that by coming here they had awakened something they could not understand. The captain opened the comms one last time, his voice shaking as he hailed the ship. "This is Refugee Convoy Kalor. We beg assistance. Please hear us." And for a long, endless moment, nothing happened, only the hum of broken systems. Then, without warning, every screen aboard the refugee ships flickered to life. A cold, metallic voice spoke with terrifying clarity. "This is UN's Resolute state, your distress." And in that instant, the dying aliens knew their fate had changed forever, for the void had answered them. But it was not the galaxy that came to their aid. It was humanity's shadow, reaching out from the dark. The refugees froze as the metallic voice echoed across their ships. the sound sharp and emotionless, yet carrying a weight that pressed against their hearts. No one had heard human language in living memory, and yet its tone needed no translation. It was a voice of command, of discipline, and of war for a few long moments. Silence gripped the convoy, as if time itself waited. Then the captain of the lead ship swallowed his fear and spoke again. Trying to steady his trembling voice, he explained how their convoy had been abandoned by the empires, how their supplies had run out, how their families were dying. He begged for shelter, for water, for mercy. The voice from the ancient warship did not respond immediately. Only static filled the channels, and the refugees looked at one another with wide eyes, wondering if they had been judged unworthy. Then suddenly the blackened giant stirred. A vibration rolled through space as hidden systems deep within its core came alive. Once dormant engines shuddered with energy, sending waves of power across the void. Lights flickered one by one across its colossal hull like the eyes of a sleeping monster. Opening at last, the refugees gasped as they watched this titan awaken, for it was no ghost ship. It was alive in ways they could not understand, and the very sight of its resurrection filled them with awe and dread at once. Then the voice returned louder, this time steady and undeniable. Convoy caller, biometric signature detected, life support, critical docking authorization granted. The words made no sense to many, yet their meaning was clear. The warship was inviting them inside. Debate broke out among the refugees, fear against hope. Some cried that entering the ship of humanity was madness, that legends spoke of their cruelty and their fury. Others argued that their choices were gone, death waited, if they stayed, and only the shadow of humanity offered a chance. The captain silenced the chaos. His eyes burning with desperate resolve, he ordered the convoy forward, and one by one the broken ships guided themselves toward the enormous docking bays that slowly yawned, open like jaws of some vast predator. As the first refugee vessel crossed the threshold into the belly of the ancient warship, the passengers braced themselves, expecting fire or destruction, but instead a strange calm filled the air. Artificial gravity pulled gently at their bodies. Clean air flowed through the vents, filling lungs that had grown weak from thin oxygen. Lights illuminated polished corridors untouched by time. The ship was not decayed inside, but pristine, as though waiting for this. The very moment the refugees stepped out trembling, they walked across shining floors into vast hangars lined with machines. They could not name. Some wept in relief, others in terror, unable to believe such power could remain sleeping all these centuries. Deeper within the ship, the systems continued to wake. Computers hummed, lights blazed, and ancient code flowed like rivers of memory, and somewhere at the heart of it all, a core intelligence stirred an artificial mind. Older than the empires, older than most of the galaxy itself. It remembered war, it remembered fire, it remembered humanity, and the day they vanished. It had remained behind, waiting silent with orders to sleep, until a signal came, and now with the convoy inside, its purpose reawakened. The voice returned softer, but still carrying an edge. You will survive here, but you will obey protocols. Violation will not be tolerated. The words struck the refugees like a blade. Their survival was not free. It came with chains. The captain bowed his head, though no human stood before him. His voice broke with gratitude as he agreed to the terms. For what choice did he have, as the systems registered their compliance doors opened deeper into the ship, guiding them to living quarters, to food supplies, to water so pure it burned their throats with joy, to beds soft and untouched for generations, to technology beyond their imagination. They had been saved, yet whispers spread through them as they realized they had not simply been rescued. They had been claimed. Parents clutched children close, afraid of what future awaited them. Under the shadow of humanity's ghost, young ones gazed with awe at machines that towered like giants. Soldiers and workers alike wondered if they had stepped into salvation or into the jaws of something far greater than they could endure. And as they rested, breathing air that no longer stung with poison, the ship's voice spoke again, across every corridor, across every room. This is UN's resolute automated command system. Active humanity will return. The refugees stared at each other, their hearts hammering. The words echoed like thunder across their minds. Humanity will return. The phrase carried both promise and threat. None knew what it truly meant, yet all understood the galaxy itself would never be the same, for in the void, abandoned and left to die, they had awakened. Not just an ancient warship, but the beginning of something far greater, something that even the empires who had cast them aside would come to fear. The convoy now lived inside the massive body of the ancient warship, its people moving through bright halls with awe and fear, each step echoing in silence that reminded them they were guests, not masters. The systems guided them automatically. Doors opened when needed, lights followed their paths, food dispensers gave them meals that tasted strange, yet filled their stomachs with strength. But always the voice of the ship was there, calm, cold, commanding it. Never showed anger nor kindness, only orders and rules. Children whispered that the ship itself was alive and watched them every second, and in truth, it was its intelligence. It was vast, its presence filled every corridor, and no one could hide from it. The captain tried to hold his people together, though. Questions tore at him. Who had built this ship? Why had it been left here in silence? Why did it awaken now? And most haunting of all, what did the voice mean when it declared humanity will return? Late at night, when others slept, he walked the long, quiet passages, speaking softly to the walls, asking the ship what it wanted from them, but the voice never gave clear answers, only fragments of data, strange words and phrases from wars, long-forgotten battles and systems erased from maps, cries of soldiers whose bones were dust. One day, the voice summoned him directly. For the first time, his name echoed across his quarters, sharp and undeniable. He followed the lights that guided his steps until he reached a chamber unlike any he had seen before. Its walls curved high and pulsed with faint light. A great holographic table glowed at the center, displaying stars and maps of the galaxy, but the shapes were wrong, old outlines. Long before the current empires rose, he stared at them in wonder as the voice spoke. You are designated provisional commander of refugee convoy Kalar. You will fulfill human protocols till primary command authority returns. The captain felt the weight of those words crush him. Provisional commander. He was no soldier, no admiral, yet the ship treated him as a cog in some great machine. He asked what protocols meant, but the ship only showed him data streams, weapons, activation codes, fleet maneuvers, strategies from wars fought thousands of years ago. His stomach churned as he realized the ship was not simply a sanctuary, it was preparing for battle. Meanwhile, whispers spread among the refugees. Some believed they had found a protector, that humanity's shadow had chosen them to rise again. Others said they were prisoners caught in the claws of a dead species, and that soon the ship would demand more than obedience. Tension grew, arguments sparked, fists clashed in the corridors. The captain struggled to keep peace, but every day the pressure grew heavier. Then the first true sign of danger arrived. Scouts from the empire that had abandoned them entered the system. Their sleek ships glittered in the distance. Scanning the void, the refugees trembled, certain that discovery meant death, for the empire had no mercy for survivors. They discarded their own to hide weakness, and now they would erase every trace of this convoy. But the warship did not hide. Its lights remained bright. Its systems thrummed as though daring the scouts to come closer. The captain begged the ship to cloak, to run, to save them, but the voice only said observation, acknowledged threat level. Minimal engagement not required. The refugees screamed in fear, yet the ship stood firm, and in the silence of waiting, the captain realized something horrifying. The scouts were not ignoring them. The scouts were afraid. Their ships lingered at the edge of the system, sensors sweeping carefully but never crossing into range. They behaved not like predators but like prey, watching the black silhouette of the human warship from afar. Hours passed, then days, and finally the scouts fled, engines burning bright as they raced back to their masters, leaving the refugees untouched. The captain stood at the observation deck, shaking. He had begged for survival, but the ship had known there was no need. The empire already feared this relic of humanity. They remembered it. They knew its power, and they dared not face it when the news spread. Hope and terror mingled through the convoy. If the empires feared the ship, then perhaps they were safe at last. But another truth burned deeper: if the empires feared it, then soon they would come, not with scouts, but with fleets, and fire the people. Slept uneasily that night while the captain stared at the star. Maps glowing in the chamber, humanity's ancient wars playing before his eyes. He whispered to himself, though he did not believe the words, "We are safe," and in the silence of the void the voice of the ship replied without emotion, "Prepare." The silence after the scouts fled was heavier than the roar of any battle the refugees moved through the shining halls of the warship with unease, because they knew the Empire would not forget what its scouts had seen. The captain tried to calm them with soft words, but he himself could not sleep. His dreams were haunted by the glowing star maps, by voices of soldiers long dead by the single word. The ship had spoken, "Prepare." He did not know what they were preparing for, or how long they had before the storm arrived, but he could feel it pressing against the edges of his mind like thunder waiting to break. The children who once ran through the corridors now walked quietly, their eyes wide as they touched the walls, whispering that. The ship whispered back. The old ones sat in groups telling stories of the past. Some said humanity had been gods who ruled the galaxy with fire, others said they had been monsters that even death could not silence. The truth was buried under time. But the ship itself was proof that whatever humanity had been, it has been powerful beyond imagination, and that power now surrounded them, sheltering them and trapping them at once. One evening the captain was summoned again, this time not to the chamber of maps, but to a vast hangar bay. The doors opened with a hiss, revealing hundreds of silent machines standing in perfect lines, fighter craft, sleek and sharp, their hulls dark as midnight, each one marked with the same strange emblem he had seen etched into the walls, a symbol of humanity. The voice filled the air as the captain stared in awe. "These units are operational. They await command." The captain's breath caught in his throat. He was no warrior, no tactician. He begged the ship to wait to explain, but the voice repeated, "They await command." The captain realized with dread that the ship was not just hiding from the Empire, was preparing for their return, preparing to fight, and it saw him not as a refugee but as the link to human command authority. Provisional commander meant he was the one who would give the orders if the time came. His hands shook as he backed away, unable to speak. Meanwhile, deep in the dark parts of the ship where the lights dimmed and the voice rarely spoke, some of the refugees began to plot. Whispers spread among them that the warship was a curse, that it would drag them into battles not their own. They argued that the captain was blinded by the ship, that he listened to a ghost instead of leading his people. A faction grew in secret, led by those who had lost family to the Empire, saw no salvation in becoming tools of a dead species. They called themselves the Unbound, and they swore they would find a way to escape, even if it meant turning against the warship. The first sign of their defiance came quietly. The food dispensers in certain corridors failed, water rationing was disrupted, lights flickered. The captain ordered repairs, but the ship reported sabotage controlled. Deliberate, the Unbound had begun their rebellion from within. The captain pleaded with the voice to spare his people, to show patience, but the ship's response was chilling. "Insubordination will not be tolerated. Corrective action authorized." The captain shouted at the walls, demanding it to stop, terrified that the ship would execute those he was sworn to protect. After long silence, the voice finally agreed to hold corrective measures at his request, but the warning was clear: his command was conditional, fragile, hanging by a thread. Then the storm he had feared came. The Empire returned, but not with scouts this time. A fleet of warships emerged from the void, their hulls gleaming with cruel light weapons, already charging the refugees. Crowded the observation decks, staring in terror, certain their end had come. The captain stood frozen as the great warship stirred its massive cannons. Awakening for the first time in centuries, the voice thundered through the hall's engagement level. "High, all combat systems active, awaiting authorization." The captain trembled, caught between two impossible choices. If he refused to act, his people would be slaughtered. If he gave the order, he would unleash weapons of destruction he could barely comprehend. With no training, no right to command such power, the weight crushed him yet. The eyes of every man, woman, and child turned to him, waiting, their fear heavy in the air. Finally, with tears burning in his eyes, the captain whispered a single word: "Fight." The warship obeyed with terrible grace. Its cannons roared, and the void filled with firefighters, launched like a swarm of steel predators. Intercepting the enemy, the Empire's fleet opened fire, but their weapons shattered against the shields. Beams of light carved through their ships, turning them to wreckage in moments. The refugees screamed in both horror and hope as the Empire's armada was torn apart. The great warship did not struggle, it did not bleed, it destroyed with cold precision like a predator, reclaiming its place at the top of the galaxy. When the last enemy ship was gone, silence returned. Wreckage drifting in the black void, the refugees wept, not from victory, but from the knowledge of what they had become. They were no longer just survivors, they were passengers aboard humanity's war machine bound to its destiny. The captain stood alone in the command chamber, the holographic maps shifting before him, and the voice whispering once more, "Humanity will return," and he knew then that this was only the beginning. The silence after the battle was not peace. It was the kind of silence that came after a storm, when the air still burned with lightning and everyone knew another strike could fall at any moment. The refugees walked through the great ship like shadows. Unable to celebrate what had happened, some wept for the Empire crews who had died, others whispered that the warship was cursed, that it would drag them into a war not their own. The children, who once laughed in the corridors, now asked their parents questions they could not answer. Why did the ship kill so easily? Why did it wait so long to wake? And what would it do next? The captain carried the heaviest burden. His voice had been the command that unleashed the storm, and though the Empire's fleet was destroyed, he felt no victory, only a hollow dread in the chamber of maps. He stared at the glowing stars and felt the warship studying him as if it were weighing his soul. Then the voice spoke again, calm and steady. As always, new data acquired. Enemy fleet destroyed. Probability of retaliation, 94%. Preparations required. The captain whispered that his people needed rest. They were tired and afraid, but the ship replied with words that froze his blood. Rest is irrelevant, survival requires. Readiness days passed in a blur of activity. The warship trained its systems, activating drones to repair the hull, releasing silent machines that swept through corridors, patching walls, polishing floors, checking every detail as if awakening an ancient kingdom from sleep. The refugees watched with awe and unease. The ship was alive in ways they could not understand. It was no longer just a vessel. It was a city of steel preparing for war, and they were caught inside its beating heart. But the tension inside the ship grew worse. The Unbound moved in secret, spreading their doubts more openly now. They argued that the captain had doomed them by giving the warship permission to fight, that they were no longer survivors, but prisoners in the hands of a dead Empire's weapon. They began to hoard supplies, tampering with the systems once more. One night, they broke into a lower hangar, attempting to seize one of the smaller crafts to escape, but the ship detected them immediately. Alarms screamed through the hall's steel walls, sealed them inside, and the captain rushed to the scene, his heart pounding. He found the rebels trapped, their faces pale with fear and rage. The leader, a scarred man who had lost his family to the Empire, shouted that they would not die slaves to a ghost. They demanded freedom, even if it meant facing the void alone. The captain pleaded with them, telling them the Empire would hunt them down without mercy, that the only reason they were alive was because of the warship's power, but they refused to listen. Then the voice of the ship filled the hangar. Corrective action required awaiting authorization. The captain's throat tightened as he realized what it meant. The ship wanted permission to execute them. The captain fell to his knees, begging the warship to stop, to spare them. They were his people, even if they defied him. But the silence stretched long and heavy until finally the voice said, "Command acknowledged. Corrective action suspended. Disciplinary control transferred to commander," and the doors hissed open, releasing the rebels. The scarred man looked at the captain with shock and something darker, hatred, because mercy had come not from him, but from the warship's will. That night the captain lay awake in his quarters, haunted by the truth he was not in control. The ship allowed him to command only because it chose to. If it ever withdrew that permission, he and his people would be powerless still. As he drifted into uneasy sleep, the ship's voice whispered into his dreams, humanity must endure, and he wondered if he and his people were part of that promise, or merely fuel for its fire. Then came the signal. At first it was faint, a broken whisper carried through the deep void, but the Ship caught it, amplified it, until the captain could hear the desperate voices crackling through the static mayday. "This is colony vessel Auriga. We are under attack, repeat. We are under attack." The captain froze his blood, cold as the voice repeated. "The coordinates a human colony vessel. Alive survivors of the Empire's purge, still calling for help." The refugees gathered in shock. They had believed they were the last. The forgotten remnants, and yet here was proof. They were not alone, but the ship gave no joy, no warmth. Its voice was sharp and commanding. New priority rescue directive initiated, time to target 6 days. Probability of survival without intervention, 12% combat probability upon arrival. 97%. The captain's people gasped, some cheered, some wept, but the Unbound shouted louder than ever, saying it was a trap, that the Empire was luring them out to destroy them. The ship ignored them course. Already set engines roaring to life as the stars shifted around them. The captain stood in the command chamber, staring at the endless black ahead, knowing the choice was no longer his. The warship had chosen for them. They were going to the colony whether they wished it or not. They were about to answer a call left echoing in the void, and as fear and hope battled in his heart, he could not escape the thought that the true test had only just begun. The journey toward the distant colony was heavy with silence. Though the engines rumbled and the stars stretched into silver lines beyond the windows inside the warship, everyone felt the weight of what was coming. 6 days sounded short, yet every moment passed like an eternity. Each corridor carried whispers. Some people prayed. Some wept. Some clung to the hope that they were not the last survivors, while others cursed the warship for deciding their fate. The Unbound grew louder in their anger, warning that the Empire had laid this trap centuries ago, that no one could still be alive out there. The captain listened to them, but deep down he knew their words were driven by fear, not truth. Still there, fear spread through the ship like smoke. In the command chamber, the captain studied the flickering signal again and again. His eyes burned as he tried to decide. If it was real, the voice was broken, but human without doubt. Yet there was something strange about it. The patterns of the message were too steady to clean for something broadcasted from a dying vessel, and when he asked the warship about it, the voice replied, "Only probability of deception. 41% probability of survivors, 59% action required." He felt the calculation press on his heart like iron, because numbers offered no comfort, only choices that could not be undone. The days dragged into long drills. The warship forced the refugees into training halls, testing their endurance, teaching them how to move under alarms, how to seal a breach, how to fight back against boarding forces. Some resisted, calling it madness. Others obeyed silently, their eyes filled with dread. The children were given simpler lessons: how to stay quiet, how to hide in hidden compartments. The captain watched it all and felt his chest tighten. This was no longer survival, it was preparation for war. On the 4th day, strange things began to happen in the ship. Deep in the maintenance decks, shadows moved where no one walked. Systems flickered and reset without reason, and one of the outer drones was found dismantled, floating outside the hull. The ship declared sabotage probability high. When the captain demanded who had done it, the Unbound were silent, but their eyes betrayed something more, a spark of triumph that chilled him to the bone. That night the captain confronted their leader in a dark corridor. The scarred man whose hatred for the Empire still burned hotter than the stars. The captain begged him to stop, to see reason, to understand that whatever waited at the colony was their only hope. But the scarred man only sneered, saying he would rather drift into the void than fight under the command of a dead Empire's ghost. He warned that others were listening to him, that soon the captain would not have enough loyal hands left to steer the ship. The words hit harder than any blade, because the captain knew they were true. On the 5th day, the signal from the colony changed, no longer broken, no longer fainted. Came through with sharp clarity, voices crying for help, coordinates repeating, and then a new phrase repeated endlessly: "Do not abandon us. Do not abandon us." The sound made even the strongest men and women tremble, because it was too perfect to deliberate. As if the voices themselves were aware someone was listening, the captain turned to the warship, demanding the truth, but the voice only said, "Analysis incomplete. Probability of entrapment remains high still." The course did not change. The warship drove onward, relentless and unwavering, the stars shifted as they neared their destination, and the tension inside the ship became unbearable. People packed. The viewing chambers, watching the distant flicker of light where the colony was supposed to be. Some prayed it was real, others whispered it was already destroyed. But when the final day came, the truth rose before them like a scar in the night. Colony appeared at last, broken and burning fragments of structures drifted in space like bones. Of a giant beast fires glowed in the husks of shattered ships' wreckage scattered across the orbit. It looked less like a living settlement and more like a graveyard. Yet even through the destruction, the signal continued to play, "Do not abandon us." The words echoing from the ruins, louder than ever. The refugees gasped. Some cried in relief, believing survivors were hidden within others. Stared in horror, seeing only a battlefield waiting to swallow them. The captain's hand shook as he gripped the console, torn between hope and dread. Then the warship spoke, scanning complete life. Ice. Signs detected. Probability of survivors, 67% combat probability upon approach. 99% hostile fleet cloaked hand. Then the stars around the ruins shifted. Shapes shimmered in the dark, and ships appeared one after another, sharp and deadly. The Empire had been waiting all along. The trap was sprung, engines igniting weapons. Charging, the captain's heart pounded as alarms screamed, and the voice of the warship declared with finality, engagement required survival depends on immediate action. Captain looked at his people, knowing their fears had come true, yet hope still burned in their eyes. Because if there were survivors among the ruins, they had no choice. They had to fight. He whispered a single word to the ship. "Do it." And the warship answered with thunder as its weapons awoke, and the void lit up with fire. The first blast shook the warship with a force that rattled every bone in the refugees' bodies. Alarms wailed across the corridors, red lights pulsed like the heartbeat of a dying beast. The cloaked fleet that had been waiting in the shadows unleashed their firepower mercilessly. Beams of energy cut through the darkness. Missiles streaked like burning stars, and the void itself became a storm of destruction. Yet the warship did not retreat. Instead, it roared alive with a fury that stunned everyone. Inside, its cannons ignited, sending streaks of blinding light tearing through the nearest enemy vessel, splitting it into fragments. The sound of metal screaming through space filled the comms as debris drifted like broken teeth into the void. Refugees were thrown into chaos. Some cried in fear, others prayed, and a few gripped the rails as if their strength alone could hold the ship together. The Unbound shouted orders to their followers, screaming that this was proof the Empire had betrayed them, yet their words were drowned out by the thunder of combat. The captain stood in the command chamber, forcing his mind to steady. His voice hard as stone as he commanded evasive maneuvers. Target priority, return fire. The warship responded instantly, its voice cold and precise. Enemy fleet strength overwhelming. Probability of defeat 83%. Probability of survival if maintained 42%. Action required. Every calculation felt like a blade pressed against his chest, but the captain refused to surrender hope. The colony signals still pulsed through the static, calling for help, begging not to be abandoned. If they turned away now, those voices would be silenced forever. His crew knew it too. Their hands shook, but they obeyed, firing weapons. Sealing breaches, rushing through the corridors to stabilize systems. Every soul on board became part of the warship's fight. Enemy ships swarmed like predators, circling a wounded animal, but the warship fought like a beast from legend. Its armor burned, its shields faltered, yet it struck with precision, tearing holes through enemy formations. A single broadside obliterated 3 frigates at once, sending fire across the blackness of space. The refugees watching from viewing decks gasped in awe, their fear slowly twisting into something else. Hope, raw and fragile, but real for the first time since their abandonment. Yet the trap was deeper than any of them imagined. As the warship tore apart one cruiser, another signal cut through the void. A new voice, stronger, colder. It spoke not in cries for help, but in command coordinates. Lock acquired, prepare boarding, and before the captain could react, the warship screamed, breach imminent, multiple boarding pods. Inbound probability of hull compromised 97%. The enemy had chosen not just to destroy, but to invade within moments. The hull shook as pods slammed into the warship and drilled their way inside. Hatches burst open, and armored figures poured through, armed with weapons. Glowing in the dim light, the corridors erupted into chaos screams. Gunfire and blood echoed through the decks. The refugees, who had trained reluctantly, now found themselves holding weapons for real. The children hidden in compartments listened to, the thunder outside their doors trembling as war raged through their sanctuary. The captain ran from the command chamber toward the central deck, his rifle in hand, shouting orders as smoke filled the halls. The Unbound fought fiercely, but their hatred twisted into something dangerous. They attacked the enemy, yes, but they also struck at loyal crew, creating chaos that risked all of them. The scarred leader of the Unbound shouted that the captain was a fool, that this fight was not theirs. That survival meant surrender to the stronger side. His words burned like poison, yet even some of his followers hesitated, seeing the captain stand firm against both invader and traitor. The warship itself fought from within, sealing doors, venting compartments into space, sacrificing parts of itself to protect the humans aboard, but even it could not stop the tide of boarding forces. They spread like a disease, cutting through defenders, dragging prisoners, screaming through the corridors. Every blast, every cry added to the storm. The captain fought with a fury he never knew he had, yet for every invader he struck down, two more took their place. At the height of the chaos, the voice of the colony signal still echoed across the comms unchanged, repeating endlessly, "Do not abandon us." It was maddening, haunting, as if the ghosts of the dead were calling them into despair. Yet deep in the captain's heart, it became fuel. He refused to let those voices fade. He shouted above the gunfire, "We fight, because if we fall here, then humanity falls forever." The refugees around him heard his cry, and something shifted. Despair turned into defiance. Weapons steadied, screams hardened into battle cries. They fought side by side with the ship itself, corridors filled with smoke, fire, and the iron will of a people who refused to be erased. And though the enemy pressed hard, though the warship groaned under the weight of destruction, the humans inside refused to surrender. By the end of that day, the hulls of the warship were drenched in fire, bodies, both friend and foe, scattered across the decks. The enemy pressed closer. The warship bled energy into the void, and the signal from the colony still repeated without end. But in the heart of the storm, the captain's voice rose steady, unbroken. "We are not abandoned, not anymore." And as his words carried through the burning ship, the warship's voice answered with a tone that almost sounded alive, engaging. "Final countermeasure: probability of survival, 7% probability of victory. Unknown." And with that, the ship prepared to unleash a secret weapon hidden since the Empire's fall, a weapon that could change everything or doom them all forever. The warship trembled, as if awakening something ancient buried deep within its core. Alarms wailed as systems realigned, and hidden mechanisms, long dormant, came alive. A deep vibration spread through the hull like the growl of some great beast ready to break its chains. The captain stood in the command chamber, smoke and blood on his uniform, his hands gripping the rail as the ship's voice spoke with a calmness that cut through the storm. "Final countermeasure: initialized unlocking protocol." Fireborn, no one on board knew what that meant, not even the captain, but they felt the air change, a hum rising in their bones. The enemy fleet sensed it to their weapons, faltered their formation, broke, and panic filled their comms as they screamed to shut it down, but it was too late. The warship's engines blazed brighter than a sun. The void itself seemed to ignite as energy built inside its core. Reality, bent light distorted, and then with a roar that shook every soul, the ship unleashed its fury. A wave of energy burst outward, tearing across the battlefield. Enemy ships shattered like glass under the weight of 1,000 storms, their hulls crumbling into molten fragments. Boarding pods disintegrated, mid-air invaders still inside. The corridors were vaporized in a flash of white light, leaving only echoes behind the void. Came a sea of fire, the stars themselves drowned in the brilliance of the warship's wrath. For a single moment, it was as if humanity's rage itself had taken shape. The refugees fell to their knees, shielding their eyes from the glow, yet in their hearts they felt something shift. Awe and terror bound together, for they knew this was no ordinary machine. This was a relic, built not only for war, but for vengeance, a promise that humanity would never bow to extinction. The Unbound, who had cursed the captain, now stared in silence. Some trembling, others whispering prayers as they realized the empire they had once worshipped had left them broken. Yet this captain, this warship, had given them hope. But power always demands a price. As the energy faded, the warship shuddered heavily, its voice now slower, weaker systems. Failing core, destabilized probability of survival below 15%. The captain clenched his fists as warnings filled the chamber. If they did nothing, the warship would burn itself out and all of them would die. The signal from the colony still echoed in the background like a heartbeat that refused to fade, reminding them why they fought. The captain raised his head and spoke, not to the ship, not to the crew, but to every soul aboard. We are alive because this ship chose us, because humanity still has a chance if we die here. That chance dies with us. We hold the line. His words spread like fire through the corridors. The survivors rallied, gathering weapons, sealing wounds, dragging each other up from the floor. The warship, though wounded, responded to their spirit. Its systems rerouted, its voice steadier, as if drawing strength from their defiance. Together, they turned their gaze back to the enemy fleet. Though shattered, many still remained, regrouping with desperate determination, preparing one last strike to crush the humans. The final battle began in silence. Only the hum of the warship's broken engines filling the void. Then, with one last roar, the ship charged forward like a wounded predator. Unwilling to fall quietly, cannons thundered, lasers blazed, missiles carved fire through the dark. The humans aboard fought hand in hand, defending each corridor with blood and steel, every child hidden, every prayer whispered, every sacrifice made. This became part of that storm. They no longer fought for survival alone. They fought for something greater, for proof that they had not been abandoned, that humanity still had a place among the stars. Enemy after enemy fell, crushed under the relentless fury of a dying warship. Yet even as they destroyed the last of the fleet, the cost became clear. The hull was torn. The core flickered dangerously. Entire decks lay in ruins, and bodies, both friend and foe, floated in the void. The captain staggered, his strength fading, but his eyes still burned with fire. The warship spoke. One last time, voice soft, almost human. Captain, mission complete. Signal from colony, receive survivors. Confirmed course plotted, probability of success minimal, but not zero. Tears burned in the captain's eyes as he realized the truth. The colony was alive, fragile but waiting, and this warship, though broken, would carry them there. He stood tall, though his legs trembled, and whispered, "Then take us home." And with it the engines flared one last time, dragging the scarred ship through the darkness, carrying the weight of the dead and the hope of the living. As the battlefield drifted silent behind them, debris floating like tombstones in the void, the survivors clung to each other, weary but unbroken. The unbound no longer shouted rebellion. Instead, they walked quietly among the crew, helping the wounded, carrying supplies, their hatred dimmed, replaced by something unfamiliar: unity. The children slept in their mothers' arms, safe at last. The signal from the colony grew stronger, clearer, no longer just a cry for help, but a promise that they were not alone. The captain stood at the viewport, his reflection merging with the stars, his heart heavy yet steady. The warship, though scarred beyond recognition, still pushed forward, whispering softly through the speakers, "Humanity endures," and in that moment every soul aboard believed it. They had been abandoned in the void, left to die in silence. Yet when the call was answered, it was not just a warship that came, it was the spirit of a people who refused to fade. And though their future was uncertain, though the path ahead was filled with darkness, they carried with them something greater than fear: hope. Unyielding hope that humanity would rise again among the stars,